Cool. Am I allowed to already share my slides?
Yes.
Okay, then let's do that. And then we dive right into it, I'd say. Um, yeah, so once again, hello, ProductTank Perth. Um, I'm so glad to be here to talk about storytelling and product evangelism because to some extent it's a bit of an undervalued skill of all us product people and super important skill to build, so to say. And I bring you a bit of a background story for that one. In my role as a product leadership coach, I often get asked by people if I could help them to get closer to the Steves and Barracks of this planet. That's obviously not what they're actually asking, right? So, product people that I'm working with often ask things along the lines of, okay, Petra, can you help me to provide more directional clarity to the teams and the people that I'm working with? Can you help me share the things that I know are important right now with the people in my organization in a way that it actually sticks and helps them making decision? Or Petra, we've learned tons of things in our product discovery initiatives, but to some extent, I struggle to frame all of that in a nice and coherent way so that I can share it with my teams. That's actually the things that people are usually asking. And I'm on this stage today, on the virtual stage, to share what I've learned in this countless coaching sessions. And I deliberately decided to not make it a storytelling talk. So I will not tell you a massive story, a huge story. It's more a talk packed with tips and tricks that could help you to start with your self progression journey when it comes to storytelling, I'd say. And I like to start with a super small task just to get you in the mood, so to say. And I would be think back to a business experience where someone truly inspired you to. To change course or to take action, a meeting after which you felt energized and motivated to return to your task and just tackle your next talk. So, just for some seconds, maybe 20 seconds, what was the occasion and who was that person talking to you back then? A business meeting that left you inspired. Okay, now let's continue. You still can write it down in your preferred note taking app if you want to, or you just keep it in mind. That's fine as well. Let me guess, you would love to be as inspiring as this person in your product role when working with your product development team. But I often hear, and that might be the case for many of the people in the room right now, you struggle to picture yourself as a great presenter, storyteller, or a great speaker. And that's one thing that I could hopefully help you with today. Let me help you reframe business storytelling in particular, and hopefully help you mute your inner critic when it comes to exactly this point. And I therefore, or to do so, to help you mute this inner critic, we'll talk about the following things. So, why are stories important, especially for us working in product? Why I call them a design tool, and why and how it is easy to improve your storytelling capabilities, so to say. Now, we are not exactly born telling stories because we just cannot speak from our first day on this planet, right? But we still, from a very early age, learn that a good story is what gets us something we want, actually. So, storytelling to some extent is baked into our DNA. And I'd say the parents or aunts and uncles, people that are in close contact with children, know exactly what I'm talking about. Just a brief anecdote. So, it happened to me 2 summers ago when my little 3-year-old back then asked me, "Hey, Mama, can I wear my winter boots to kindergarten today?" And I was like, "Oh my God, I have actually no clue where these boots are stored." But then she explained to me that she and her best friend at kindergarten wanted to play Frozen. And as part of an authentic costume, that's not a word she was using, obviously, but that's what she explained to me along these lines. She wanted to wear her heavy winter boots on a hot summer's day because of this play they wanted to play in kindergarten. Actually, a pretty clever move, right? By making her wish part of a bigger narrative, she was way more convincing. So we humans use active storytelling to convince others. And it is not only the active storytelling. We love to listen to stories from a very early age as well, because stories entertain us and they captivate us, and they just help us to learn new things and gain new insights. That is what they do. And they are doing this because they have a biological impact on us. They trigger the release of hormones, and these hormones, they act on us in a very powerful way. It is, for example, oxytocin, which causes us to build trust and generosity and a personal connection. And then there's endorphins, which can make someone love or help people to deal with fear and with pain and with uncertainty. Or it could be dopamine, it could be dopamine, which leads to a desire to know what happens next if someone tells a story with peaks and with cliffhangers. And let's face it, all of these things on this slide are super helpful and important if you're working in product. Because wouldn't it be cool to help your product development team to build trust towards the ideas that you are having, for example, or to help them deal with the uncertainty that comes with this, hey, we have to build a new product, or even if it's just a new feature, there's always some uncertainty around it. And after learning all the things about the impact stories have on us, I would totally agree with what Carl Aviani said some years ago. And he said, like, we human beings, we think in stories and we remember in stories, and we turn just about everything that we experience into a story. The ability to use stories to inspire others to work with us to solve a problem, particularly as a group, has given our species, the Homo sapiens, the unique evolutionary advantage that has enabled us to collectively survive and even thrive on the planet. And ages ago, this was to collaboratively hunt down dinner. And now it's more to share global threats like a COVID pandemic or something like that. But it's exactly the group work and the storytelling around us that has gotten us here. So now we've learned that stories are important and that every one of you, by definition, is a storyteller. So that's the good news. Let's dive a bit deeper into business storytelling and the power of stories. We did this little task in the beginning. So I think, unless you have a blank page there. But if you have put a name down and an occasion down, you already have experienced the power of a good story. So business storytelling is a thing. And one well-known use case for business storytelling that we all are familiar with is used by the iconic brands we all know. Their shortened slogans, often just a few words, really can evoke images in the brains of their customers that encourage their minds to wander to a better future. That is actually one thing that we always want to achieve, help people to understand what the better future could actually be. So think about Nike's Just Do It, or Apple's Think Different, or an old BMW slogan, which is the ultimate driving machine. I love this one in particular. And it's not only the marketing claims that transport these brand stories, right? They always have a great personality somewhere on their staff list that are actually telling these stories to the world and within the organizations. And I think this is a highly underrated skill. And many organizations are unaware that better storytelling really would make a big difference and that would help ease some of the internal pains that they are having. In fact, I saw many products that have never seen the light of day because of the storytelling in the team was slightly off, or even in the organization. And as a result of that, the product team, the product development team was uninspired, not really motivated, maybe even divided, and or stakeholders, often both, were not convinced to support the effort of this team at all. And that is another thing that I experienced the hard myself. And so let me briefly share my storytelling story. I once was a product manager for development team working on a job board product. So we were helping companies to find new talent and talent to find their next employer, so to say. And we were working on a lot of things in parallel. I thought I was really good in managing the backlog and prioritizing talks and writing user stories. My user stories have been the best one on the planet. But to some extent, the stuff that we were releasing was not making a significant impact. And now you could say, ha, Petra, we know what you have been missing because only writing backlog items and prioritizing them, that's not the full story. Maybe product discovery, user research, talking to your customers could have helped. The sad story is we did all of that. We were running several product discovery initiatives to better understand our product shortcomings and how users are actually looking for a job, what are the competitors doing actually, so where could be our innovation and a bit of a contribution to a better way of approaching job search. But still, the stuff that we were launching was not gaining traction. Our metrics were not really improving, and the team was rather frustrated by all of that. And that obviously summed up. So at some point, I was really frustrated as well because I had no clue what else we should be doing. So I decided to seek guidance with my product coach back at the time. I luckily had somebody external that I could meet every, I think, bi-weekly or something like that is how we met for an hour. So I asked him for some suggestions. And he pointed out from what he observed from the sidelines, so to say, that we were not effectively communicating some of the things that we found in our discovery efforts. So important information got lost, and sparks did not fly, and the team was neither inspired nor motivated by the things that we shared with them, the things that we shared about our discovery learnings. And so it was hard for them to connect their work to what actually the users and customers need. And without this clear understanding of how the user needs fit to the company strategy and the product strategy we had, the dots were not really connected. And they really lacked the motivation and inspiration to innovate on behalf of the user. Because that's actually, and that's another thing the coach pointed out, that we want to achieve as product people, right? We want to help our teams to innovate on behalf of the user because they know what technology is capable of, often better than we do. So we want to give them as much information that they could actually do their job well and innovate on behalf of the user. So what have happened is the coach helped me to make the connection between my pain and the potential solution of, hey, maybe you need to become better in storytelling and product evangelizing to help people see these connections and have more of this directional clarity and understand where are we headed and why we are headed there. And was that a pleasant session? Definitely not, because the product coach back at the time was Marty Kagan. And in this one session, he told me that he thinks my storytelling skills are basically non existent. That's what he said. It was pretty harsh critique. But as every good coach, he not only shared his observation with me and helped me realize that, oh, maybe storytelling is something that I want to learn more about. He also pointed me in the right directions and helped me to understand where I could start my self progression journey. And one thing that he, for example, recommended me to do is read Guy Kawasaki's book, Selling the Dream. And that's exactly what I did now. I know, serious 90 vibes with this book cover. Sorry for that, but that's how it looks. Um, After reading the book, I realized how Guy Kawasaki's ability to tell great stories was vital for the Macintosh and later Apple's success story. And I really understood the critical importance of storytelling. And developing this skill really changed the rest of my career to an extent because I then started to tell stories that united my product development team and that convinced the stakeholders that we had done our product discovery homework. Or I figured out that it really helped marketing to position the product in much better ways because even they um, benefited from the insights that I shared from what we learned in our countless product discovery initiatives, but I shared it in a compelling way and in a way they could digest it and add it to the things that they were preparing for a product launch, for example. And most importantly, I figured out what mattered for our users in this process of creating the narrative. So it really helped me to structure my thinking. And I was then able to provide direction and clarity to others. And that is why I call stories the perfect design tool, because basically everyone has the ability to create one. Then it is super easy to iterate on a story. You could, if you keep it on the spoken words level, you can tell it to one person, see how things resonate, and then refine it and tell it to another person and see how things resonate. So it's super easy to iterate on it. And it really helps you personally to gain more clarity if you need to put things in a particular structure. So for me, it is more a tool that product people could add to their toolkit. Like, for example, I don't know, drawing wireframes or building a prototype or a click dummy or something like that. It is something that you put out there, refine it with your team, refine it yourself, iterate on it, and then it really helps your product management practice. Now let's dive into the process of creating a compelling story, because so far it was a lot of blah blah, me trying to convince you that storytelling is important, but you're still like, okay, Petra, but how am I going about it? So what is the thing that I could do tomorrow, right? And I'm stating some obvious things here, just that we have set the basis here. We need a well-defined structure for telling a great story, and a well-defined defined structure helps people to understand the important stuff and to navigate the story. So where are we currently? And therefore, a story needs a beginning, a middle, and an end. And we consciously want to think about, okay, what belongs to which part of the story. And here's one high level structure that really works well for me in many, many coaching sessions. And that is the structure that I will talk about in a second. A story that helps others to get excited about something. And that's exactly what we want to create, a bit of buzz. Um, Such a story has a few key elements. First, it paints a picture of a desirable future. Then it makes it clear to the listeners why they should become part of this future. So, what's in for them? And then it acknowledges the current situation while it is describing the potential difficulties that may arise and why it is worth overcoming it. And it suggests a common goal with just enough information to make next steps clear to the listener. And one story structure that could be combined with what I just talked about is the hero's journey. And the hero's journey starts in the ordinary world with a call to adventure. And that could be in form of a big dream or this desirable future that I was talking about. And it then progresses through a succession of challenges and trials and tests before reaching the ultimate destination where the hero has achieved their goal and is transformed, sharing what they has learned with others. And as product people, we are called to adventure by the promise of a new product in very much the same way than the hero is called to adventure. And one thing that you need if you want to start this story writing written narrative exercise tomorrow is undoubtedly time in your calendars. And I know that's the hard bit for product people because all of you are triple booked and super packed. So how to find time for creating such a narrative? That's a big ask, I know. But or no, not but comes with the next click. For the time being, creating and writing down a story is a lot of work. But if you do it right, and that is actually really what I see to be true in many of my coaches, is you can use the same story for months or even years. Especially if it's product strategy story that you share, then it's often a 12 months spanning story, maybe even 18 months spanning story. So you don't have to create a new story all the time. It is definitely a bit of an upfront investment. But if you do it well, then it will save you hours of meetings, convincing people that the things you're planning to do are the right things to do. So making this time investment early on usually pays off. So make some times, and then you can follow some of the actions that I'm suggesting on the next slides. One thing is you often have to overcome the fear of the blank page, because that's real. And one exercise that you could do with your team or with yourself, depending on your product leadership style, I'd say, and it's a 30 minutes exercise. You fill in the blanks here. We currently want to, in order to, because if we don't. Is this getting you a full narrative, a full story in the form I'm talking about? Definitely not. But it gets you going, it gets you in reflection mode, and you then could start to lay out your bigger narrative, right? And this part, don't overthink it. Just open your preferred text editor or whatever tool you like to put text into, and just start to write your narrative. And one thing that you need to decide on early on is, do I want to put the customer and the user in the hero's role, so to say, or is it my team? If your team currently needs a bit of an extra motivation boost, I would tend to put the team in the hero's role. If it's just user centricity, that is still something the team and the whole organization struggles with, then maybe lean toward the first option and put the user and the customer in the hero's role in your journey. And then you just follow these 4 steps. So paint a desirable picture of a future. What do the people need to know that they see the same bright future for your product than you currently see? Then make it clear why they should be part of this endeavor. And I like this 3-step thing, like tell them why it's good for them individually to be part of it. Sometimes that has to happen in one-on-one situations, and you don't want to do this in a broadcast situation, but still think about it. Then why it is good for us as a team, as an organization? Why are we currently working on that topic? And last but not least, hopefully, why it's good for all. So our customers, the users that are using it, some of the partner companies maybe that we're working with. And it could be even further, if your company has a strong purpose, then maybe you could even talk about good for all in terms of humankind, right? So make your story a big story, I'd say. And then step number 3 is think about the difficulties that may arise. Run casual interviews with a few people, learn about their reservations regarding your mission, and then make sure you get that covered. Communicate that you understand these reservations, and make sure that your story highlights that you believe in the talent and in the strength of the team, and that as a team, you will figure out how to overcome these obstacles and how you will be able to kill the monsters that stand in your way. Because let's face it, in product development, there are always monsters, from tech legacy to hardware pieces that have not yet been invented. And the team really needs to think about these things for your product to be successful, right? And then last but not least, present a shared goal. Make sure you create a sense of urgency so that everybody knows, okay, we have to work on these things now or in the near future. And think about this, how much information do I need to share so that people can really go back to the desk and start some small activities along these lines? It can be something small, but try to prime them towards an action. Now you have created your story. It is work, I know, but if you follow these instructions, I'm pretty sure you will be come up with a decent version of your story. Now, how do you make your message stick? As humans, we are clearly inspired by the spoken word and by a written message. That's something that we all have experienced, but we also inspired by pictures and illustrations and drawings. So if you want to make your message stick, you want to make sure you have it ready in various formats. So written is one idea that could be on a wiki page at your company's wiki. Spoken is what I'm currently doing. So it's me talking to you, supported by some slides. And illustrated is yeah, there could be various things. So a drawing that you can draw on a whiteboard or a flip chart while talking about the story that you want to share. So if you currently have a strategy at your company, a product strategy or company strategy, think about what is the one thing that everybody is constantly drawing on a whiteboard when they talk about this story. And if that is non-existent, I would strongly suggest you to think about something, some visualization aspect of the story that you create, because it just helps people to remember the story in times when they have to make product trade-off decisions, and that definitely will happen. Then you want to have your story ready in 3 different lengths: short, medium, and long. And short is the equivalent to an elevator pitch. That's 150 words approximately. That's 75 seconds. And the 75 seconds are here because research indicates that when you tell a short informative story to an executive online these days, their attention span is maxing out at 75 seconds, right? So you want to have a really short version of your story ready to make sure to bring your points across. Medium is obviously longer. I suggest a length of 900 words. That's about 6 spoken minutes. I think that is a good length for a story, a product story. So you could share the story again if you have a sprint planning meeting, for example, so that everybody again is reminded of why we're here, why we are doing all of this, what are we trying to achieve. And you want to think in repetition to some extent here as well. So you could tell people what you're going to tell them, and then you tell them what you have to tell them, and then you tell them what you told them. It really helps, again, to make your message stick. And by the way, this medium length is what we're talking about when we hear Jeff Bezos' Amazon 6-page document. So that's approximately that length. And then you need a even longer version. It's 80 spoken minute. That's the TED Talk length. You're then able to tell way more detail, touch way more details, share more of the insights you gained in the discovery process, for example. That's maybe something that you only deliver once in a company all hands, or then repeat it quarterly or something like that in front of a bigger audience. But I think it really makes sense to have your story ready in various formats and various lengths. And you have already, I think, throughout this presentation, realized that I'm a fan of drawings and illustrations and pictures, and that I really believe they help you tell a story. This, by the way, is just a random drawing that I use if I have to explain increments and iterations. Um, but find something that is as sketchy as that, that helps you tell your story and helps people to remember what you have been talking about. And if this is something you're not yet good at, then you could dive into the art of sketchnoting. So these are a few books that help me to get going, and that often helps as well. Reach out to some of your colleagues. I just recently had a coach. He found somebody in his design team really being into drawing cartoons, and now they have really nice cartoon strips, 4 cartoon strips that illustrate the product strategy that they have been working on. So that actually would be a solution as well. Now you have a good story. You have it in various formats. Now get ready to tell your story and to rehearse telling your story. And here's some tips for the last phase of this process. Avoid using buzzwords and tool names and 3-letter acronyms. Please grab a text mark and get rid of all of them, because so our brains just light up if we use natural language, right? Brains never use light up on 3-letter acronyms. So grab a text marker, get rid of all of the company lingo and all of this industry lingo that we often tend to use, because it's just not as inspiring as you use natural language. And try to reflect on company terms that are used very, very often in your context, because it's a bit like with banner blindness. Our brains tend to tune words out that we hear way too often. And in some companies, I find it to be customer success, because everybody's talking about customer success for the last 3 years. So maybe find another word for that, maybe something less technical. I think this is actually really helpful. And that could be a peer review thing as well. Ask a colleague, hey, could you please help me to get rid of all these technical terms and company lingo? It's often easier if you're delegating this task. Then follow the advice of David Axelrod. He was campaigning with Obama, and he said, like, a good story always has to be relevant to the audience. So again, go through it, think about, is everything relevant for the audience I'm sharing it with? And important, is it important for them to hear the story right now? So timing is an important consideration as well. And is your story true? It happened more than once that I saw product leads making up product discovery results just because they want to, yeah, people to buy into the story that they were telling. Please don't do this, um, because stories can be easily misused, especially in times where people tend to believe whatever they are presented with, as long as it is explained in a compelling way. Fact check is not so much a thing. So don't add to that. Make sure your story is true. Then, as always, we product people love our experiments, so we run experiments. We already run the early ones to find the reservations that people are having, and that helped us create our story. Now, again, we run to see if we have most of the stuff people are asking us covered. So, are they drawing the right conclusions after they hear the story? Or are they asking the right things? Or would the next activities that they would then conduct be the right activities and the ones that I want to inspire? So, this is definitely something that you want to do. Then check if your story really lights up their brain. So use words that provoke emotions and use words that trigger their senses. And I think you remember the little girl in heavy winter boots on a hot summer day. So that's how we actually do it. And please try to make them laugh every once in a while. I know it's hard. So when you're German, it's not an easy task, I can tell you. But it really makes sense to think about, is there a possibility to make them laugh? Because that releases a lot of the tension that your audience might experience. And then you need to rehearse your talk and you need to share it in the various formats. And while you're doing so, please make sure that you show curiosity and passion for the topic you're talking about. That's sometimes not that easy after you have rehearsing several times. Sometimes some of the sparks get lost. So bring them back. And then really, again, think about, am I talking to their minds and to their hearts? Because it's your job to do that and not so much your job to convince them of something. So let me bring this down, so to say, a bit of a recap here. Um, I want you to remember that humans automatically think in stories. And when we hear a good story, they trigger something in us. Stories are, that's why it's so attractive for product people, they help to facilitate group work and they inspire people to become part of a movement. That's exactly what we need, right? Everyone in this room and over here can tell stories. The skill just often fades because we're not using it a lot, but you can bring it back and it's worth to invest in that skill. And it only takes a few simple steps and skills, and I know a bit of your time in your calendar to do that. So think about your audience and what they want to achieve and talk about what's in for them. Then use a proven storytelling structure to ensure that nothing is missing. Have your story ready in a variety of ways, in short, in medium, in long, as well as in a written and a spoken and an illustrated format. And then make it your story. So be prepared and able to tell your story without any lengthy preparation whenever you need to share it, because your story is so good that it's hard for you to forget anything about it. And I hope this leaves you with enough motivation and tools and tips and tricks to start your written narrative exercise tomorrow. And if you get stuck, and you will, then come back to this talk and the slides that we will share later on. Or, and that's another great idea, let yourself be inspired by some of the best storytellers of our time. And I shared a list with their talks online so that you can watch some of them and see what structures are they using, how are they telling great and inspiring stories. And I'm sure if you do so, all of this will get you closer, closer to the Steves and Barracks of this planet. That was the impulse. That was the talk. Now, thank you, Product Tank Perth, for listening in. And I'm so curious about the questions that you all will be asking. Thank you.
forward to going and telling some stories myself. Really practical.
That's cool. Mission accomplished.
Great tools, very practical. We're going to go into questions and answers now, Q&A. We've got some great questions that have come through on the app. What we'll do is we'll go one for one, questions in the room. If anybody has any, please raise your hand, and then we'll do a question from the app.
First question here, is it possible to see the room again? Because we did this in our trial run. I think that would be super good if I could see some of your faces.
We'll give it a go. If you want to stop presenting, Petra.
Yeah.
See if that does anything.
Oh, wow.
Can you see us? See the room?
Not yet.
There's a spotlight on the service side.
We have 70 product people here. I'm sure we can figure it out.
We're going to try a few things. Turn it off.
While they do sort that out, just letting everyone know I did see. Oh, great.
Yay!
Met my KPI for tonight.
I did see everyone taking some photos. Just letting you know the recording of this will be made available on meetup after the session. Okay, hands up if you've got questions, please. Okay. Oh, here we go. Stand up.
Okay, Troy, thanks for the talk. My name's Ben, I'm actually a salesperson, so storytelling is a bit important in that regard. I'm just wondering, how do you approach changing your stories depending on the level of, I guess, resistance you're expecting, depending on your ask, or, you know, dealing with institutional inertia?
Ooh, that's a great question. Yeah, it really depends on the environment, right? So I have several coaches that once they have created their story, so the part of creating the story is the harder one, because in the moment when they start to create and compile their story and people hear about that and want to participate, then a lot of alignment needs to happen, right? Because in the moment you put things on paper, people start to disagree. And in some companies, that is the hard part, to come up with a first initial agreed on aligned version of the story, and that takes ages. But then they don't have to change the story that much over time, because then everybody basically is on board when they really start to share it with a wider audience. In other environments, it's the total opposite. Then the product person comes up with a story, and people so far not engaging a lot, and then they're rolling out the story, and in the moment they roll out the story, people still not engaging that much. But then if they see what the teams are working on, and they see how the roadmaps get impacted, then people start to disagree. And that often causes a lot of changes to the story once it is created. So I would totally recommend to try to go for the first approach. It will take you longer to create the story then, but it helps with the alignment. And if you're playing in the latter team, then rhythm helps. So then try to find a rhythm that is okayish for everybody on the team, in the organization, when you revise and rework your story. Maybe it's a quarterly rhythm, hopefully not a weekly rhythm, because otherwise the storytelling effort, the effort of creating the story is not worth it. But really, rhythm and a bit of rituals around the storytelling and the story refinement helps you to make sure it's not too crazy, and you don't have to change your stories way too often. And there was a second part to the question that I haven't yet answered, but I have forgotten about it. So now please remind me if you still have a microphone.
Yeah, so just, you know, a bit of an extension on that, like dealing with institutional inertia in when you're sort of selling a new idea. Thanks.
Yeah, that is so far, if people really invest their time in coming up with such a bigger story, that is actually the way how to deal with it, right? If you take the step that I was suggesting of having these early interviews to learn more about people's reservations really seriously, then you would head out to your marketing colleagues, your sales colleagues, senior executives, and hear how about the reservations towards your mission. Um, And that is actually the process that I would suggest. So in the process of creating the story, make sure you had a diverse set of people you were talking to and learning about the wordings that they use. And it often happens. So for example, if, I don't know, you're saying product discovery, but other people say user interviews only. You still could decide to use that term over your term because that's just how the rest of the organization is referring to it, right? And another thing that you want to think about is institutional ego. That's usually how I call it. It's often that companies think things should happen and think products should be delivered and think that this is the right thing to do. Um, and that is another thing that you want to fight while creating the story is this institutional ego. But to do that, you have to understand where people are coming from, where stakeholders are coming from, where management is currently coming from, what are their biggest concerns, how do they measure success? And then you want still to make sure to bring all of that down to the user level or to the team level and put that in the center. Yeah, you have definitely to spend a lot of time with your stakeholders and the rest of your institution to make sure you listen to the reservations.
Excellent, thank you, Petra. One from the app now. What story are you most proud of telling and what made it successful?
Ooh. Yeah, various ones. So actually the one that I'm still really proud of is that first one that I created, because it was just this experience of, oh my God, now everybody it seems so unblocked. And it was just because of me spending, I don't know, 16 hours putting stuff onto paper and think about how am I presenting it. And that changed the whole dynamic of the team dramatically. So to some extent, that is definitely a story that I'm proud about telling. And then a bit later in my career, I was general manager for a small, or I became because VCs convinced me to do it, general manager for a startup. And there we created a big narrative around the vision and the mission and the product strategy. It took us quite some time, and we involved 12 people from every parts of the company, so to say. And it was a massive undergoing. I think it took us 8 weeks, 3 months to really get there. Not full time, obviously, but still some workshops, some working. And at some point, we even launched marketing materials that help people to understand this story, even externally. So we really made it the story not only a thing for the internal usage, but even for customer acquisition and all these kind of things. And that definitely was a super helpful exercise as well, because it really united this whole organization of then 80 people. So it was not a massively large organization, but before that, everybody was slightly confused about where are we headed and why we're here and what we're doing, especially because we had a large sales team and we're constantly onboarding new sales colleagues, and the story really helped us with the internal alignment, and even it helped the clients to understand what we were able to offer and what we are up for in the future. So that's another story that I'm really happy I created.
Awesome. Another one from the crowd, if anybody would like to put their hand up. Okay. Oh, Julie.
Only if
Of course.
Petra, I'm really curious because obviously at uni, Joseph Campbell was one of the philosophers that I was most passionate about, and I really love the hero's journey. I was listening to an Agile podcast maybe a month or two ago, and it was really about within the drama triangle, there's the hero, the victim, and the villain. And I'm just wondering if you could, maybe I'm a simpleton, give me an example of a story. If I think of the hero's journey and I think of my team or my user on the hero's journey, and making sure that the impacted people of receiving that story don't become the victim or the villain, and see the team and the user as this hero, and then the drama triangle unfolds. So, does that make sense? Sometimes
Yeah,
I'm a
totally. I
little
love the yeah, it's super good question. Exactly, because that's what we don't want to do, right? We don't want to create a story that is finger pointing to, and because of the sales colleagues are not happening as properly, or because of, oh God, leadership wants to have exactly this thing, right? So we don't want to create drama by shielding ourselves from other parts of the organization. And I think that's where the shared goal come into play. That's one ingredient that I was talking about a lot. So suggest a shared goal that is not only uniting your product development team, it hopefully unites all the rest of the people that you need to collaborate with to release your product. So if that is, and it's definitely, there is always go to market teams. That's maybe marketing, that's maybe sales. It depends on your company's context, right? But they with you on this journey. So when you think about shared goals, then think about them as well. And that is another thing where oftentimes product managers and product leads are then start a bit of a grassroots movement because they uncover that teams have conflicting goals right now. So the sales team has been tasked with one thing and the marketing department has been tasked with another thing, while product and product development is working on a third thing. And that might start this conversation, and I know that's not an easy one. Hey, do we need a better way of setting goals? And not looking at department goals so much, and more looking at, okay, what matters across the board? How do we as an organization are delivering products that people actually love? So when do they love the products, and how could we in our departments contribute to that? So that is one thing that I think is super important, to make sure you not have two siloed versions of your story. You want to think about the people that are creating the product with you, and that's not only the developers, that's all the people that you need to work with. And then I'm actually not sure if we ever had, so the villain is things that have not yet been invented or created. There could be the tech legacy. So for me, this is usually more circumstances, boundaries, limitations, that, or the reservations that everybody knows that you're having. For example, oh, if that is something that we need to do, then really we need to hire 5 more people, because currently nobody has a clue about generative AI in our company, but now we need to look into generative AI right now. So how do we find these people? How do we work with these people? What is the impact on our team? So that could be obstacles, and that could be the villain type of things. So it's not people, it's more steps that you have to do, tasks that you have to perform to actually be successful in the long run. So that's how I would usually frame this part. So that's the monsters of my story. But the team with the right sword in the hand, they will figure it out. And maybe you can already suggest first things that they could do or something like that. But that helps again the other departments management to understand, oh, this is not an easy win. This is not an easy thing, because we have these many things that we have to think about before we actually get to this brighter future. And the villain thing is just something, the victim thing is just something that I haven't yet seen to be a problem with most of my coaches. So they keep it with that's your opponents in terms of tasks and things that you need to consider and tackle, and not so much about people. And maybe sometimes it's you have to get the development team out of the victims mode and make them more into the heroes role. That's what I meant about if you want to put them in the heart of your story. But then you definitely don't want to talk about them as the victims of something. So maybe we can just skip that part of the drama triangle and just keep it to the villains and the heroes for this product stories.
What a great question. We have on the topic of generative AI, we have a spicy one on the app. Do you recommend outsourcing storytelling to ChatGPT?
I actually do. Yeah, I actually do. I think it is. I actually do. It is super helpful. Again, you need to overcome this fear of the blank page. And another thing that we want to get out of this whole storytelling narrative is this clarity of thought. And by asking ChatGPT the right questions, you are gaining clarity of thought because you have to provide context to ChatGPT to come up with the right story. You have kind of helped ChatGPT how to tweak the story so that it makes more sense. And if ChatGPT cannot come up with a okay-ish story, then maybe your input parameters have been off. So maybe you haven't provided it with enough context, for example. And so I would rather use it for testing your story, peer review. It's actually pretty good in doing peer reviews. So put your story in there and then with the right commands. So ChatGPT, you're now an expert in product management and product discovery and product development. Can you please provide peer review to my short story here? Would you be motivated as a team member by this story here? And at least the prompts that you will get back get you again and in reflection mode. So I would never suggest you to ask it for a compelling story and take that and go share with it. You still would need to come up with the various formats, but play with it a bit, see what comes back, and it still helps you to get your story more complete sometimes or more ruggedized to some extent. Or, for example, that's something that I see a lot happening with my coaches. They start with a long version, an 18 minutes version of the story, and then ask ChatGPT to come up with useful smaller ones because it's just like it can do this in seconds where you would need maybe ages. And there's a lot of beauty in saying like, hey, this is my 80 minutes version of my story. Can you provide me with 20 75 seconds versions? And that reading these 20 different shorter versions of your story again helps you to reflect on, okay, what really matters in a short story, a short version of my story. So yeah, I would recommend use it.
Embrace the change. Okay. Any more questions in the room?
Thank you. Petra, I'm formulating this question because I didn't want to miss what you were saying, so hopefully it comes out okay. When we don't have the luxury of telling a story from scratch and following, the tips and tricks, what are some nuances or tips on reframing or retelling a story? Or in the example I'm imagining right now, it's teams that have been lumped with something without a good story, but you want to reframe it or retell it. You don't have the luxury of starting from scratch and, so yeah, I just wanted a bit of an angle on that if possible.
That's another great question. Yeah. I think there are two things that you could do. So you could work backwards and you could start small. Let me explain both of them. So starting small is just you usually have a realm of impact, and that is maybe your product development team and not further than that, or you inspire a bigger squad or something like that. So whatever it is, think about, could I improve storytelling in close proximity to where I'm actually working with, just for the time being and to get you in the groove. Maybe not yet a story that has massive impact and helping everybody to get this directional clarity, right? But providing them with a bit more information and connecting the dots a bit more for the team. And how I would do it, I don't know how many of you are working in agile teams, scrum teams, all these kind of things. I assume many of you do. So maybe review meetings are a thing. Then start with review meetings that give a bit more context to the people listening in, to the stakeholders that are coming, and improve the storytelling there. Or your sprint planning meetings with your product development team, try to be a servant leader and connect the dots for them. So what we currently want to work on for the next 2 weeks, next iteration, with a quarterly goal or whatever you got. Maybe it's a bit of a strategy, maybe it's a quarterly goal, maybe it's just a speech the CEO gave last month. But try to connect some of the dots and help everybody to understand what they're currently working on and how it contributes to the bigger company's success. And that was the start small thing. And what was the other thing that I was thinking about? Yeah, work backwards. In retrospective, look back to your last quarter and think about what could have been the story that I could have been telling at the beginning of the quarter. That's another thing that you could do to see, okay, is this company maybe way too chaotic for quarterly stories? Or would it actually be possible with me investing a bit more time in the beginning of the quarter? So that would be another tip. So look at, and the quarter is more or less the smallest time span that I would suggest you really to create a story with these various formats and stuff like that. Hope that was helpful.
Petra. We're very grateful to have the opportunity to ask you these questions from across the world. I'll just hand over to Darren now to close up. Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you, Petra. Let's put our hands together. So thanks, Petra, for making time. Yeah, I know it's morning time for you, so thank you. Thanks to everyone in the room. Hopefully you got some lessons there. We always hear how compelling storytelling is, and how it can convince stakeholders and get your team motivated, but the how is always so important. So it was good to hear from Petra tonight. Don't forget, we've still got drinks and food. Don't go home with your pass unless you fancy coming to visit us tomorrow to return it. But thanks, and we hope to see you soon at the next ProductTank Perth event.